So first, I'm going to give you all a quick overview of the ID3 event, and then I'll take you through the guide that we've put together. We'll then take some questions before moving on to an overview of the wider project by Lee and some exciting talks by Kendra and Seb to give you a bit of inspiration on Web3 for international development. Then after the talks, we're going to put you in breakout rooms for about 10 minutes so you can network with each other taking part. Alex will be providing links on Discord, so if you need to find them, please look there. For anyone who hasn't yet joined the Discord, the invite link will also be in the Zoom chat. And during this call, please post any questions in the ID3 general channel on Discord. So thank you all for signing up. So this is an ideathon focused on Web3 for international development. We hope that you'll find it an enjoyable event. So ID3 is hosted by us at Phase 3 and the Frontier Tech Hub, and it's funded by UK Aid. So Phase 3 is an innovation consultancy focused on Web3 technology. Please reach out to either myself or Alex for any further questions about what we do. The purpose of the ID3 event is to crowdsource ideas on Web3 for international development with the aim of informing UK government policy. The ideathon will take place over the next 48 hours, starting after this call, with submissions due at 12 p.m. UTC on Sunday. So feel free to choose the hours that you work over this period. It's a fully remote, no-code event, and we encourage you all to sleep well and take regular breaks. So you're probably all eager to learn a bit more about what the event will entail. And we've put together a guide for you, which I'll walk you through. And Alex will also drop a link to this guide in the ID3 general chat on Discord. So we've had about 35 people sign up so far, and we're going to help people form teams if they've not found one already. So I'm just going to share my screen. Awesome. So this is the guide. So in terms of where to start, first of all, we want everybody to meet their team. So introduce yourselves, get to know each other, and we suggest making a team chat for this. If you're still looking for a team, then you can go to the team formation channel on Discord. And if you still need help finding a team, please reach out to myself or Alex and we'll help you. The first thing we want you to do with your teams is to start brainstorming ideas. So there's lots of people with different backgrounds that have signed up to the event, which is really great. And so you're all going to have different ideas about what you want to work on. So have a brainstorming session is what we suggest. And we put together some resources to help with this. There's some ideation techniques and also a systems thinking resource as well. The idea is we want you to think big and to be speculative and to start thinking about how the ideas that you want to work on might fit in some of the key themes, which I'll go through in a second. But once you've done the brainstorming, we want you you and your team to choose one idea, which you're then going to build out during the event. And we've got a series of tasks to work through. So the first thing, once you've chosen your idea, is we want you to identify the key themes that it fits within. So these are the 5 themes here. So we have supporting sustainable economies, female empowerment and protection, humanitarian response, climate change and protection of nature, and also global health. So people your idea might not necessarily fit in one theme, which is fine, but just make sure you make it clear which of the themes that your idea fits in, the idea that you've chosen to build out. So the first thing we want you to do once you've done that is to describe the problem that you've chosen to solve and how your idea will address this, and also what impact your idea might have, and relating these back to the themes. The next thing that we'd like you to do is to think about the context of your idea. So this is, who is it aimed at? What's the environment where it'll be deployed? Is it remote community? Is it a low trust environment, etc.? Following that, we want you to think about the communities. So who will have an active role will they have an active role in co-creating or governing it? And do they have the necessary tools or expertise to achieve those aims? Following that is thinking about the technology. So this is where we want you to explain, are Web3 tools the best way to address this problem? And what might some alternatives be? And then thinking about risks. So what are the possible negative consequences? Who's going to be accountable for risks? Those kinds of things. And then finally, the logistics. So what might the life cycle look like? How will you evaluate the impact? Those kinds of things. This last bit about if there's anything else you would like to share, please don't worry if there's not, it's just in case there is. And then in terms of submission, we're happy to accept any format at all. Don't think of it as a pitch, just think of it as whatever works for you and your team best. So whether that's a document, a video, a slide deck, a collaboration board, we're happy as long as you've shown how you've attempted to answer the tasks above in a clear and concise way. And we have some suggestions for, like, you know, maybe no more than 5 minutes for a video, maybe maximum of 10 slides for a deck. Then in terms of the judging, which I'm sure you're all really interested to hear about, there's going to be 4 prizes, each worth the equivalent of $500 US. And to be eligible, we want you to just show how, firstly, your idea fits within one or more of the key themes, but also demonstrate that you've attempted all of the tasks above. The 4 prizes are greatest involvement of relevant communities, best use of Web3 technology to solve a problem, most thorough exploration of risks, and most inspiring idea. So the panel will look at all the submissions next week, and all of your answers will be taken into account, but there'll be slightly more weighting towards different answers depending on these prizes. And we're aiming to notify people by Monday the 1st. Also, POAPs, these are NFTs that show that you've participated, and everybody who's part of a team that submits an eligible project can claim a POAP as well. And we'll obviously be on hand for any help and support that you might need during the event. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. And I just wanted to say that we have a couple of minutes to take any questions that might have come in. So please ask these now or drop them in the Discord if there are any there. Are there any Discord? Maybe I'll check now. So I don't think we've got any in the Discord, but if anyone's got any questions now, please ask them. Otherwise, we will move on to hear from Lee. Oh, there's a team chat. Yeah, cool.
Someone has their hand up. I think that's, yes, Mayank, yeah.
Hi, Alexandra, hi, Sarah. Thanks for this, I really appreciate it. I was just sort of curious, you mentioned that that this particular hackathon is meant to inform UK government policy, and I was wondering what you sort of foresee as being, you know, next steps following the hackathon, and also in terms of sort of, I don't know if this is like too early a discussion, but just in terms of like intellectual property on ideas that are presented and whatnot. I mean, is it that, you know, once we sort of submit ideas that essentially they become the property of the UK government because they sort of take it from there on, or if there's other arrangements, like, I mean, just any sort of insights on that would be super useful and super helpful. Yeah.
It will be open source, so that is in the terms and conditions. So yeah, it'll be open source.
Yeah, and Lee's going to give a bit of a wider project overview next. So Lee, I'm not sure, do you think you will answer more of the questions about the informing government policy within your talk?
Well, I can also just address it straight away, to say that the role of the Frontier Technologies Hub is to advise FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, on all matters relating to frontier tech, which Web3 is a part. And what we're hoping to do as a result of this piece of work and a few other things that we're doing on Web3 is to host a symposium later this year where we showcase what we think the opportunities, the potential threats and unintended consequences might be for Web3 for countries that might be considered to be developing. So it's not necessarily for UK government policy directly, it's more as a kind of public and global good funded by FCDO and available for everyone else to help people to think about Web3 in a more informed way. Does that answer your question? Great.
Great. And do we have any other questions? Otherwise, we will move on to hear from Lee now. Cool. Okay. So next up is Lee, who's a founding partner at Brink, an innovation practice that blends behavioral science with classic innovation methodologies to make a positive impact across the world. So she's the lead on the Web3 for Development project that this ideathon is part of, and has been working on innovation and exploration projects with the UK government for the last 5 years. So over to you, Lee.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Alex, for that great introduction. It is a real pleasure to be here. We have been talking about this topic, Web3 for development and for social impact, for some time. And it's to be in a room with people who love nerding out about this stuff to start making it feel real. So it's a real pleasure to be able to kick things off with the Phase 3 crew today. Thank you to Phase 3 for making this happen. Thank you to FCDO for funding it. I know Seb is here, who is our colleague from FCDO, and you'll be hearing from him in just a bit. I thought I might I'm only going to talk for 5 minutes or so, and I thought I might tell you why we're doing this project, why it matters to us, what's interesting to us about it, and then hopefully give you some steers on the kinds of ideas that might be most useful for everything that's to come on this piece of work. So the Frontier Technologies Hub, as I've already mentioned, works a lot on thinking about how technologies might be leveraged for social impact, specifically in countries that might be considered to be more developing. So typically that's South Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And, you know, we've been around for about 6-7 years. And one of the things that we see is that technology is not equitably distributed. And certainly that the technology we find ourselves surrounded by today, in infrastructure terms and even in software terms, seems to have been designed and defined by a very privileged few, typically on the West Coast of America. And this is something that we grapple with a lot and that we try to address through our work every day. And as a team, we were kind of looking at the world and seeing all of this new stuff springing up around Web3. And we were seeing all of the same stuff that you were seeing, right? NFTs everywhere, Yeezy's Twitter handle, CryptoPunks, the kind of applications of Web3 that is kind of in the newspaper headlines. And we kind of had this inkling that now, while Web3 is still relatively new and relatively nascent, there must be a way that we can kind of get in on the, maybe not the ground floor, maybe the first floor, but in the early days, to support how these technologies might be shaped and to consider applications for them that are more useful than Twitter handles, but that maybe solve actual challenges on the ground. And as well as being kind of opportunistic and maybe optimistic about what's possible, we were also curious and keen to start thinking about what the potentially unintended negative consequences of some of this technology might be, so that we could inform colleagues at FCDO how they might dream and think about Web3 as it emerges, but also so that we could share what we find with the rest of the sector and the rest of the world. So that's our kind of point of departure and why we're excited about learning more with all of you. Like I've already said, we're going to be hosting a symposium towards the end of this year where we put the work that we've done together and in this group on a stage and invite other people to join us to think about, you know, useful and meaningful applications of this technology that they might be uncovering in their own work. To do this, and I think Sarah and Alex have already touched on this, we really want to invite the people who are working and dreaming with these tools and these technologies already, and that's you guys, to speculate with us. Because one of the things that we find kind of curious and hard about researching this topic is that it's changing all of the time. So the first thing that we want to do is imagine ourselves like a little bit out of the today and a little bit into the future, and think about how we imagine these technologies and these kind of applications might play out, and the world that we might find ourselves in the near future, so that we can be inspired to take action. So the first thing is to please speculate with us, use all of the knowledge that you have of what's happening today to imagine how things might shake out down the line. And then the last thing I'll say is please, please, please think really, really big. The example that we use on the FT Hub that tends to make sense of what we mean by big is that we have a really rare opportunity here to talk to donors, philanthropists, the people who are making big decisions on government and policy level about how these technologies might influence their world. And so the good proxy that we use is, if we're talking about agriculture, you might say it would be a really, really neat idea to give all farmers in sub-Saharan Africa an app that connects them to one another and allows them to learn how to yield more from their crops from one another. And that might be a very, very good idea. We're more interested in the idea that's like, can we put satellites above these countries that make the weather data? Could you say that again? Thank you, Siri. Can we make sure that satellite data is getting to these farmers and that the accuracy of their weather predictions is improved so that they can use more useful data to yield more for their crops? So hopefully that's a good kind of proxy. We're really interested in the satellites. We want to think about the big ideas that are going to really, really move the dial on how people live and work and, you know, do business with one another in the markets that we're interested in. Hopefully that's inspiring. I'm inspired and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lee. That was very inspiring. Thank you. Okay, great. So we've got two more, we've got two speakers lined up for you now. So firstly, we're going to hear from Kendra Leong. So she's a former executive of a US government international development agency, most recently having served as general counsel and chief ethics officer of the US Trade and Development Agency. She currently serves as an independent consultant and advisor on international development projects with a focus on governance. So her journey into Web3 began about a year and a half ago. She's a core team member of She 256, where she helps lead their governance initiative relating to voter delegations. And she's a contributor to numerous communities and forums, including Future Foundation and ENS. She's also the original catalyzer for a project called Noam, which lies at the intersection of Web3 data and sexual and reproductive health. So over to you, Kendra.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex, over at Phase 3. And thank you to the Frontier Tech Hub for hosting this as well, and for UK AID, who has funded this hackathon. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be inspired by what everybody is coming up with. One of the first things that I might do just really quickly is here in Australia, we do something called an acknowledgement to country, which is the way that we sort of open up an event like this and speaking, and allows us to give and show respect to the traditional owners of the people of the country. So I'm actually coming to you from the Gold Coast of Australia right now. So I would like to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh region, the traditional owners, the land on which I'm currently located, and I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that might be here today. I'm going to start sort of talking a little bit about sort of my journey into international development and Web3, and then how it sort of relates with what we're doing today. Basically, over 20 years ago, when I went to law school, I wanted to study international law and focus on developing countries. And I was lucky to have gotten a position at the US Trade and Development Agency as a law clerk one summer. They typically don't hire directly out of law school. So I had sent out over 200 resumes before graduating, where I wanted to work in international development and I wanted to be in DC. And for those of you who are coming from the international development community, you'll know how hard it is to get into that. So I got all of 0 offers from those 200 resumes. So I just packed up my car and I just moved to DC without a job. Within about a month or 2, I was offered 2 jobs, one back at the US Trade and Development Agency, but one also as a permanent full-time position in international terrorism litigation. Now, the problem with the USTDA position was that it was a 6-month contract position. It was not going to turn into full-time. But because of the mission and the value alignment with international development, I ended up sort of taking that job because I wanted to change the world. I wanted to build something and help build something that could help others and support others that were less fortunate. Fast forward 15 years and I had become the general counsel of that agency. And I'm not necessarily trying to tell you this to like pat myself on the back, but I'm trying to sort of emphasize that sometimes you go down a route and you sort of take a fork in what you're working on because it aligns with your values and something that you're drawn to. And only after sometimes several years do you look back on that journey and it becomes really clear how that action was able to sort of have a positive result. Because only really through that one decision in my life was I able to then live those values and work on hundreds of projects around the world, including helping to sort of rebuild Indo-Pacific after there was a tsunami, helping to rebuild Haiti and their electricity infrastructure after an earthquake, and a number of other projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Indo-Pacific, a lot of places. It was, like many of you, I only recently sort of came into the Web3 space. It's a relatively new space. But when I got into this space, I realized that there was this really great alignment of values between what this sort of core group of people in Web3 was talking about and the sentiments that we were always looking at, and these core sets of values that we were talking about in international development. So really inherent in both Web3 and international development are these set of values like democracy and democratizing access. Things like the importance of a regenerative society and striving for positive sum impact. Bringing in transparency and accountability to systems and projects, and things like individual empowerment and ownership. And we've already started seeing some of these projects that align with these core values at the intersection of international development and Web3. You can look at a lot of the financial inclusion projects that are coming out of the space, projects like Cello. You can, from a regenerative standpoint, you can look at Toucan, you can look at Climate DAO, you can look at Regen Network, Power Ledger, where these projects are really thinking big and are super inspiring when you go and look at some of the work that's being done. Issues on transparency and accountability like AgriLedger, or what WWF is doing in the tuna supply chain to help stamp out illegal fishing and human rights abuses. So I'm actually really excited with all of these aligned values that really brought me into Web3 from a space where I was coming from a non-technical space into what is a very technical sort of system of values, and realizing that at the underpinning of all of this, all of those same values sort of cross both of those communities. And so I'm excited that the technology of blockchain is really giving us this vehicle to focus on those values of democratizing access, of regenerative society, transparency, accountability, individual empowerment, while also pushing us to think through this sort of what this new concept of value is. That in international development, we've kind of looked at things from this different lens where it's not just about the economic or the financial, but we're also looking at things like the environmental, the social, the governance aspects of these projects. But we didn't always have this really easy way where we could attach value to that with these difficult to measure sort of amorphous things. And so now with blockchain and Web3, as some have tagged it, I think that the value transfer economy, that's really amplified our ability to really look at the value, enable us to digitize anything as an asset. And it's really, I think, allowed us to sort of dream and think about how we can use the technology to better align our values to how the representation and the exchange of those values are going to take place around the world. I think something that I agree with Leah said was there's kind of a lot of stuff going on in the Twitter space, or people talking about whether it's an NFT or whether it's the market crash right now or what's going on. But I think when you know the shared values of all of us that are here at this hackathon this weekend, that I'm really optimistic and looking forward to how we can sort of brush past that noise and focus on the values of the projects that we're building or that we might be building in the future, and that we can really make a sustainable long-term difference and build these values into these communities. So what I want to do a quote from a book called Impact DAOs that was written by Kevin Owocki and Ale Borda, that was funded by Gitcoin's public good funding workstream to sort of close this out. And what they said in that book is, we can embed our values into digital assets, explore a plurality of ways to transact and share value, align individuals with collective incentives, and unlock the freedom to dedicate our time to meaningful work. We have an open canvas, a new playground open to everyone. We hope to see designers use this canvas to ensure the health of our planet and people. What we build will shape the future of the society we live in. So I'm excited to see all of the amazing ideas that come out of this weekend. And with that, Sarah, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. That was a very powerful overview of the shared values of Web3 and international development. Does anyone have any questions for Kendra before we move on to hear from Seb? I can't, oh, I've got a, was that a, no, that was a clap. No, it's all claps, no hands up. Okay, cool. If there's no questions then, and feel free to drop them in the Discord as well if you come up with any later, we'll move over to hearing from Seb. So Seb is the Senior Digital Development Advisor at the UK's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. So over to you, Seb.
Right. Thank you, Sarah. So yeah, as Sarah said, I'm at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and I work on digital development strategy, policy and programs. But I have also kind of over the last several years worked on a few different blockchain projects. And what I wanted to talk about today was kind of sort of building on some of that kind of experience and just throwing out some thoughts that I hope would sort of spark some ideas. So what I'm kind of talk about is kind of in two categories. One is more about the potential of Web3 for developing countries, and the second is about the challenges. And first of all, I don't know if this has already been said, and apologies if it has, but just what are we talking about when we talk about Web3? And people talk about different things. And I'm not going to talk about the semantic web or the metaverse. I'm just kind of referring here more to things about blockchain, but kind of if you go to somewhere like Ethereum and look at what they kind of describe as the Web3 principles, it's about these kind of decentralized, permissionless, native payments, trustless, and all those are the kind of characteristics of Web3. And so, but I'd also want to just kind of look at some of those principles and bend them a bit, because I think there's a lot of value in that. So for example, often when we talk about Web3, we're talking about permissionless, so that, you know, everyone has equal access to participate in Web3 and no one gets excluded. But alongside permissionless, you often need to have native payments. So what is it that's kind of fueling your ability to create a trustless system when it is permissionless? You need some sort of cryptocurrency or something to enable the kind of mining and the consensus algorithms. But what you can do, I think, and still is very interesting in the development context, is look at the sort of permission systems that don't require native payments. So this is where, you know, not everybody has equal access to it, but specific people have access to it, and various organizations can control you know, the kind of the rights that people have within that system. And so I think there's lots of interesting things there about how you improve the ways in which the public sector organizations work together. So for example, if you were looking at electoral systems or supply chains, private sector supply chains, you wouldn't be looking at a completely permissionless system. You would be looking at a permission system. And whilst according to Ethereum, that might not count as Web3, I think they're still very interesting. Supply chains, I think, are one of the most interesting sort of applications of blockchain out there at the moment. So yeah, those are the kind of principles, but what I'd say is, like, look at bending them a bit as well. So just because, you know, it maybe not pure Web3, something can be very Web3-like, but and still very interesting. So what's the potential? The way I kind of broke this down was into two kind of main categories again, which are solving the problem of a lack of trusted institutions. So one of the classic development economic theories, and if anyone's read the book Why Nations Fail by Acemoglu and Robinson, is that long-run growth and high levels of welfare are dependent on strong institutions. So, but what happens in developing countries is often that those countries have weak institutions. And so the question is there a potential opportunity for Web3 to provide a framework for better institutions? And so an example of that would be something like land registry. And you've got, say, in Ghana, but also in other countries around the world, like Ukraine before the beginning of the conflict there, and in Georgia, there were also kind of pilots running, looking at how to have a blockchain-based land registry. So that would be an example of someone looking at a kind of Web3 type solution to address a kind of public sector problem. And as I said, that probably would not be a permissionless system. And there are lots of kind of examples of that you could look at. So other kind of sectors that people have been looking at, things like maybe electoral systems, how to make those look more transparent and accountable, and or just kind of again looking at sort of payment systems as well, and that those can be public sector or private sector. But then the other category that I wanted to talk about was disintermediation, and that's the idea that it's not always that the institution isn't trusted, but rather that you've got institutions that are acting as intermediaries with high intermediary costs. And so intermediaries often enable these, and this can be a variety of transactions that require, they enable these transactions that require trust. And Web3 has that kind of potential then to create a new structure that reduces those intermediary costs. And a classic example, I think, that was referenced in the previous talk was that there are organizations out there that work on things like remittances or cross-border payments. And those remittances often have high transfer fees, so 6-7% or higher, and can take days to clear. And so there are now many examples of companies working in many developing countries that are looking at how do you reduce that transfer fee. How do you make it cheaper for people to send money across borders? And how do you reduce the delay? And so that's the kind of really good example of where a new kind of architecture for a digital kind of business model can potentially be effective. So, and then the last thing just on kind of potential is just a couple of quick points, that, and as you'll see later, those go through ways. One is that in developing countries, there are often less legacy systems. So you can kind of build things a bit more from scratch, and you don't have to worry so much that there's an existing system that you're competing with. And also that in developing countries, they're often mobile first. So you kind of almost have this leapfrogging effect of people are expecting it to be on their mobile. They're not expecting it to be on a computer or something else like that. It's going to be a mobile first system. But then you get to, I'm going to come back to those, because those, as well as being kind of opportunities, are challenges as well for both of those. And just, I realize I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just kind of be a bit briefer on the challenges, but there are the challenges for Web3 that apply to all digital innovation in developing countries. So those are things like your digital foundations. What's the digital infrastructure? What's your connectivity like? What are the kind of existing levels of digital skills, both in terms of talent within the startup industry or within the private sector to build these kinds of things, but also in terms of digital literacy within the users that will be using the systems that are created. Where there are legacy systems, there are often kind of difficulties in interfacing them. So when we're talking about the land registries, one of the first things that people often have to do is digitize a lot of paper records, because the existing data was not digitized. So if you're going to try and base your system on existing data, it might well be that that existing data is not in a useful format. Governance, a lot of these things are about getting the right, making sure that you're working within a regulatory environment that's suitable for Web3. It could be that cryptocurrencies are heavily regulated, and so you're going to have problems with that. It could be that there's, again, and that relates to a political economy where there are kind of vested interests, maybe within the banking system or maybe within other systems that, have a stake and are therefore wary of new entrants into these markets. And then there are things that apply particularly to Web3. And I would say one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is whether Web3 can live up to the promise of decentralization. Because what we're seeing a lot within existing big examples of Web3, so take NFTs or Bitcoin, is you see a new type of centralization. You see the big kind of almost monopolies of the exchanges. You have a large concentration in mining. It's not that you are getting the decentralization that was hoped for. You are getting a new type of centralization. And so there are kind of worries about that. There are worries about energy consumption. And I think Web3 has its own kind of governance issues, in that many Web3 applications are trying to bring together a lot of different stakeholders to agree on sort of interoperable standards. And that requires a lot of work, and, you know, that kind of effort to bring together different stakeholders shouldn't be discounted. And lastly, the kind of last thing I would say is about the systemic effects. And again, that was referenced in the previous talk. You know, you've got things like Luna and Terra that, you know, you can see how that example of a cryptocurrency kind of failed quite spectacularly. But you can imagine that there are wider effects that could happen in economies as a result of a collapse in a kind of a Web3 enterprise. So that was a kind of whistle-stop tour, and I know I spoke very fast and I threw a lot of things out there, but happy to take questions, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Seb. Do we have any questions for Seb from anybody? I think I'm just seeing clapping. Can't see any hands up.
Oh, I've got my hand up.
Oh, sorry, go on, Alex.
I just wanted to ask about the leapfrogging, because I think that's quite interesting to think about with this hackathon as well. Like, do you foresee that, you know, countries that maybe have less legacy systems will be able to almost develop at a faster rate than countries who do have legacy systems? So, you know, a country like ours will be stuck in the dark ages, for example, versus countries that are able to move at a faster rate because they're not trying to transform existing systems.
I don't think you're seeing that happening yet. I think, you know, there are famous examples of leapfrogging, and the really famous one that people always refer to is M-Pesa in Kenya. And the idea that, you know, kind of the uptake of mobile payments happened a lot more quickly there than happens, for example, in the UK. But whether that leads to sustained kind of innovation in the digital systems there, that's not clear. And I think that's not necessarily kind of borne out yet. But it's still an open question about what will happen in the long run, in the next 10, 20 years. But I think at the moment, the challenges are still significant in terms of connectivity. And so it's, whilst, as I said, you know, mobile first is a kind of plus, but it's also a negative if you haven't got full coverage across the country, where there's still, the costs of data are really high, where, you know, kind of digital literacy is low, etc. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. So I don't think that leapfrogging necessarily will lead to that, but I think it's something interesting to bear in mind, in that, you know, when you're looking for opportunities, you can look for opportunities where that kind of infrastructure is potentially in place. So, for example, if you're working and figuring out, and this is where all that other stuff around innovation comes in, so all that stuff around user-centered design, and the fact that you can have, if you're trying to build a payment system for farmers in Nigeria, what are the needs of those farmers, and making sure that, say, what access do they have to a mobile phone? How much does it cost them to access the data? How frequently do they use it? Can they understand the kind of user interface that you've created? And so if you're trying to create something that will provide them a financial service, you've got to take all that into account. But if you do that, and then you do find that there's a significant fraction of farmers who are using mobile phones and can understand it, then that can become quite a good opportunity.
And I think another, just to add to that a little bit, one of the other sort of good opportunities or sort of areas that I think maybe the leapfrog could potentially be looked at as well is some of the off-grid energy that's happening. And that was a big thing that we were funding in the last, you know, decade or so, was from the renewable energy, electricity aspect, but specifically micro and off-grid, and what Web3 and the technologies and the systems enable now in terms of sort of peer-to-peer, so that you're not just talking about sort of using these larger scale sort of energy infrastructure that you would have to build, that with the infrastructure that's going into the mini and off-grid, sector, that Web3, there's a lot of potential, I think, in that space to sort of leapfrog and sort of generate some of those additional sort of positivities in that space as well. So that's just another interesting space that we could be,
and just
seeing
to build
Web3
on that,
come up. Yeah.
I think that's a very good example, Kendra. I mean, one that it hasn't taken off yet, but I think was an interesting idea, was exactly that, looking at kind of solar energy and the way in which people access solar energy through a kind of mobile-based systems, and using a kind of blockchain approach to verify the usage patterns of people paying for solar energy through their mobile phones, and then being able to use that to try and access financing from international carbon markets. And so trying to put together kind of all the aspects of a package that would actually lead to both the business model using a kind of new technologies. And I think that's the key. Can you kind of figure out a new business model, or if it's not a business and it's a more a sort of social impact kind of venture, but at least an operating model that can take advantage of the features of the new technologies that you're using.
So we hope that you enjoyed the little micro networking at the end there. So yeah, thank you all for joining. Just to close this off, I'm just really grateful that you're all taking part in this really exciting event, and best of luck to everybody on the call now and anybody watching this video later. We really can't wait to see what you come up with over the next couple of days. And also, just to reiterate that we want to make sure that your experience is as enjoyable as possible. So please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, or let us know if there's anything that you're struggling with. And if you still haven't found a team yet, there's a team formation channel in the Discord, and you can reach out to us as well if you're struggling with forming a team. So that's pretty much it. Thank you everybody for joining, and we hope that you have a good rest of your day and enjoy the event.
Good luck, everyone. Bye.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.